Welcome everybody to our webinar. We're going to be talking about deliberation of environmental issues, and especially within higher education classrooms and on the campus. This is a webinar that is sponsored by NAAEE, but also the Kettering Foundation, EE Capacity, and our two important university partners for today, University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point and Eastern Kentucky University. As I mentioned, the topic of the webinar is deliberating environmental issues. And we're going to focus on the environmental issues forums process that NAAEE has been working on, and how it's being used in higher education. And our presenters are going to be Billy Bennett and Becca Franson, Melinda Wilder, and myself, Boris Simmons. And what we're going to do, just to save time, is that each of the presenters will be introducing themselves and telling a little bit about themselves as they come along in the presentation. So I am Boris Simmons, and I'm the director of the National Project for Excellence in Environmental Education. I'm in Eugene, Oregon. And I'm also the liaison between NAAEE and the Kettering Foundation, working on the development of our Environmental Issues Forums project. What we're going to cover today is that we're going to tell you a little bit about deliberation and how we think about it in terms of the environmental issues forums, and what is a forum in general as well as on campuses. A little bit of an overview of our climate choices framework that is being used as a deliberative platform. And then I'm going to turn it over to Becca and Billy and Melinda to talk about how they're using climate choices at their campuses. And then we'll talk a little bit about environmental issues forums and what's up, what's coming next, and then open it up for some questions from you. Just in case, if you aren't able to hear us, hopefully everybody can, you can dial into the phone numbers, and then there is a code when prompted. All of your phone lines and audio off of the computer are muted so that we don't have feedback issues. So please bear with us, and then we'll be able to use the chat function. If you have questions or concerns you can't hear, we're going too fast, any of that. So you can write the message down there in the bottom of the chat function. Okay. And then at the end, we'll use the chat function also for the question and answer session. So the person who is speaking, who is presenting at any one time, isn't going to be monitoring the chat function, just because it's hard to do two things at once. But somebody else will be, and will hopefully be able to help you out if you have questions. So let's get started with the presentation. And let me tell you a little bit about the Environmental Issues Forums. It's a project of NAAEE in partnership with the National Issues Forums Institute and the Kettering Foundation. Kettering, along with the National Issues Forums Institute, created something called the National Issues Forums, kind of repetitive there, about 30 years. And it's all about how to help people talk about complicated and sticky issues. And through the National Issues Forums, they create deliberative forums on all sorts of issues, from healthcare and the national debt to war and peace to local issues. So we're partnering with them to develop the Environment and Society series that look at environmental issues. We're also partnering with a national network of centers for public life. Many of these centers are housed at university campuses across the nation. We're also working with the Harbinger Consulting Group and lots of local forum sponsors and the NAAEE affiliate network. So what we're going to cover again today, as I mentioned before, is the basics of deliberation, an overview of climate choices, then how this is actually being used within 2 examples of higher education, and what's up for EIF and your questions. So what do we mean by deliberation? This is really a very specific definition or usage. And what's important is that it's really all about carefully weighing options and thinking through what we hold valuable in order to make good decisions. So it's far more than just a general discussion. It's a moderated discussion for one thing. And it's really important to sort of understand that it's not a debate. It's not pro-con. It's really trying our best to avoid polarized discussions. We hope that through deliberation in the forums that people are able to consider the advantages and the trade-offs, and that they really think through a variety of different options of how to go about addressing important environmental issues. It's asking people to recognize that every action does have a downside and that there are no silver bullets when we talk about environmental issues or other societal issues. And one of the really important pieces about the environmental issues forums in particular as it relates to deliberation is that it takes a frame of that we're really asking people to think about what they hold valuable. That the focus is on what should we do about this issue. So it's not so much a discussion of the issue, what the issue is, the background to the issue, the technical, scientific information about the issue. It's really given that and given a basic background, what is it that we should do as a society, as a community, as individuals to address that particular issue? Some of the possible outcomes of a forum, it's everything from basic good awareness building, that people have a deeper grasp of the issue and the tensions, that they really start to understand what some of those trade-offs are and what that's going to mean and what others feel are important. That sort of notion of understanding differing points of view, and trying to avoid that polarization, that good, bad, pro, con, left, right type of framing of issues. At times, there is an opportunity for these forums to help guide decision makers. The Kettering Foundation every year selects a particular issue. I believe it was healthcare this last year, but I may be wrong. And they hold forums across the country, and they collect perceptions and attitudes and data from each of those forums, and they synthesize it, and they actually present it to policymakers. These forums are also used often in community settings where local decision makers come and use them as a way of listening to how members of their communities talk about the issue and what those members of that community hold valuable. So they are used as guidance for decision makers. One of the important pieces of the forum is really a recognition of what are the trade-offs and what are the trade-offs that we're willing to accept or not accept, that we feel just are not worth it. or have, too many downsides. And then the next sort of part of a possible outcome is that it's a starting point for citizen action, um, and allowing people to really think about what they might want to do as members of their community. So that civic engagement piece. Um, Forums are structured in a number of different ways, and it depends on the purposes. We're going to focus primarily on how they've been used in the classroom and on campus. But basically, as a whole, with EIF, anyone can basically sponsor a forum. They're sponsored by neighborhood leaders and neighborhood activists, educators of various sorts, high school, middle school, as well as higher education, librarians, book clubs, all sorts of different people sponsor um, these forums. The format, it can be a single forum where people sit down and deliberate. It can also be, they're also used in study circles where people really delve deeply into the issue and think about the outcomes, and they really sort of look at the issue over months at a time. There are ways of sustaining community dialogue. There are classroom uses, obviously. Um, when they're held off campus, so not in schools or universities, we typically suggest that people hold them in sort of natural and comfortable places where they're neutral, where people don't feel that they're sort of entering somebody else's zone. So libraries, meeting halls, churches, community centers, and such. And just sort of the win part of this is that they're typically in a community setting about 2 hours long. Now, in the university setting, that can be very different. And in a school of middle school or high school, it might be spread out over 3 or 4 or 5 days of a classroom period. We also have a number of resources that are available, materials that can help someone hold one of these forums. There are issue guides, and we'll go into a little bit more specifics about the climate change issue guide in just a moment. But there's an issue guide that lays out a variety of options and such to help with the deliberation. There's a moderator guide that basically would provide the facilitator questions that they could ask at various phases of the forum in order to try to delve into deliberation a bit more. There's a video discussion starter. It's basically about a 6-minute little video that sets up the problem and issue and then sort of outlines the options a bit so that can sort of jumpstart the discussion a bit. And then we have a participant questionnaire and a moderator questionnaire that helps us collect information about the forums and individuals' participation in the forums. All of these materials are available up on the NAAEE website, the Environmental Issues Forums pages, and you can download all of it for free, which is always a good thing. So what does a moderator do? Think of a moderator as being a facilitator. In most university settings, this would probably be the classroom faculty member, although certainly students can also be the moderators. But basically what the moderator does, the facilitator, encourages that exchange of views. They really try to drill down into the topic and get people to think about it in some depth, and really have those participants focus on the trade-offs. It's very important that the moderator remain neutral and not show any sort of favoritism, even though you may really, really like a particular comment or really dislike a particular comment in terms of your own personal views. It's really important to stay neutral. It's also important that the moderator sort of watch the discussion in terms of what types of points are missing, what viewpoints are missing. Sometimes in a forum and in classrooms and on higher ed campuses, you might have sort of a fairly homogeneous group of participants. And so certain voices are just not being heard. And that's the moderator can bring those voices into the discussion. And then obviously that it's really important that the moderator keep that conversation respectful and on task and on time. The participants, we're certainly hoping that they're trying to look at different ways of thinking about the problem or issue, that they're really exchanging their views, but they're listening to other people's views, that they're weighing benefits and trade-offs and thinking about those important values and what people hold valuable, and that they are really, willing to listen and reconsider their own views, but in a safe environment. I'm going to give you just a very quick overview of the Climate Choices Issue Guide, which is the first one that we've developed in cooperation with Kettering Foundation. Basically, the issue guide is a booklet, and it sort of lays out background information about climate change and sort of the issue of climate change, where we are with it as an issue. But then what it does to allow for this deliberation is that it lays out 3 options. And the notion of this framing is just to be able to have focused discussions and to make sure that the discussions don't get into pro, con, left, right kinds of polarized views. So in this particular case with the Climate Choices Issue Guide, we have laid out 3 options for the participants to really discuss and to think about, what works with this option, what does it mean, and what would be the trade-offs for it. And importantly, what might it look like? What would be some of the actions that individuals and governments and communities might be taking if they were going to follow this particular option? So the first option has to do with sharply reducing carbon emissions. So it basically argues that in order to address climate change, we need to take aggressive action right now to reduce our energy consumption and other climate changing behaviors, or we're going to risk catastrophe. But it also talks about the trade-offs in terms of personal choices and liberty and potential unfairness as different people are impacted by making that particular choice. The second option really makes the argument that first and foremost, we need to prepare and protect our communities, that the communities and businesses are going to be vulnerable to climate change. And, things like flooding, as we know, drought, fire, health problems, and potentially social unrest. And how do we protect our communities and prepare our communities for these possible actions or effects of climate change? And then, in protecting the vulnerable, we might be accepting greater damage from climate change, and that's a downfall. That's a trade-off. And we may be asking some people and communities to make bigger changes and sacrifice bigger sacrifices than others. And that would be a trade-off of that option. And our third option that is part of this framework to discuss, to get us into this deliberation about climate change, is about accelerating innovation. So In this one, it's argued basically that we need to invest in rapid innovation to develop new, cleaner fuel sources, new ways of to influence the Earth's climate, and even new societal arrangements, and that might be a way of addressing climate change. The trade-offs of this sort of self-reliance viewpoint could be failing to make progress quickly enough on climate change to avert the worst of climate change. We don't know if these are innovations, we don't know how or if they're going to work. And then the risk of unintentional consequences, making problems worse, and economic disruptions certainly would be a possible trade-off. As the discussion moves forward through those different options, then we move on to reflections at the individual level, the group reflections within the forum, and then next step reflections. Because after all, the whole point of this is to really be thinking about this, what should we be doing, and then circling back on that and thinking about, well, would that work? Does that work? How do I feel about how that might work and the possible trade-offs involved? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this over to Becca Franzen from UW Stevens Point and let her talk about how they're using. Oops, I muted myself too quickly. Using this in their classroom.
Well, it's great to see everyone at the webinar today. Thank you for coming. My name is Becca Franzen, and I'm an assistant professor of environmental education at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. In that position, I'm housed within the College of Natural Resources and also have an outreach appointment with our Wisconsin Center for Environmental Education. And I'm glad to be here today to talk a little bit about Natural Resources 478, Environmental Issue Investigation and Action. It's a course that's been taking place on our campus for quite some time, and it's been fun to figure out ways that we can include the Environmental Issues Forum. So I hope that this is helpful for you. To give you a sense of what the course is it's more focused. Sometimes people think that it's going to be really learning about environmental issues, the first two words in the title, but really it's focused on the last three of investigating and taking action. So considering what are potential actions that the students in the class can actually take on real environmental issues, looking at that through the political lens, what kind of economic actions might they take, legal, educational, or potential lifestyle actions that they could take. Students that take the course, it's composed of many students that are non-formal environmental education and interpretation majors. It's a required course for those students, but there's also a number of students that choose the course as an elective, and those students might come from wildlife management, forestry, environmental law enforcement, soils. So the course makeup can really vary. The enduring understandings of the course, just to give you a sense again of what the course is about, is that environmental issues are a responsibility of all of ours, both personally and professionally. And so we talk about environmental issues from both of those lenses. And then that environmental issues are set within the living, interrelated human and natural systems. So they're very complex and dynamic. And talking about environmental issues through this course, one of the learning assessments is current events, where students share current events. And regularly, the class, kind of after a discussion about environmental issues, they come to this idea of, oh my god, it's so complex. How do we address environmental issues? And the Environmental Issues Forum is one way that helps us do that. So some examples of course topics. We will have a period where we'll talk about thinking. We'll go through an environmental issue analysis as an example, and then really focus in on the pieces of environmental issue analysis as far as identifying what are the socioeconomic, aspects of the environmental issue? What are the environmental pieces to that? Who are the key players? What are their values? How do we address those values? What are potential actions that we could take? And then we also, students take action and then reflect on those actions. We talk about multiple ways of taking action, as far as if students are going to write a letter to a legislator, or if they're going to set up a meeting with local community members, if they are going to implement. We had some examples of ways of taking action. Actually, I see one of the students is on the call today, and she was able to implement composting at our university. We also have guest speakers come into the class. They can include our Portage County executive. The mayor has come in the past. We also have our campus sustainability coordinator come in, someone from Citizens Climate Lobby. So again, a range of speakers coming in to talk about all the different kinds of actions that students might choose to take. And then we take a field trip to the state capitol to meet with representatives and senators. We have ones from that represent us here in Stevens Point, meet with us and talk with us, and then students also have time to go and find representatives and senators that represent them from their home states. We also meet with someone from the Wisconsin League of Conservation Voters during that time. I've been quite surprised with the field trip. I assumed that it was something that students would have already done and not really wanted to go to the Capitol again, but they were thrilled to go in this new light of where they were feeling empowered to talk to people and make action and talk with them specifically about environmental issues. The current learning assessments for the course. I briefly mentioned the current environmental issue presentation. That's a brief presentation that's 5% of the course, where students talk, they share a newspaper article or a video, some current environmental issue, and they talk about who the key players are, what values they hold, what kind of implications it has for us. We also have an environmental leaders assignment where students are required to select a community sustainability leader and interview them, and then reflect on that and compare and contrast them with a nationally known leader as well. Environmental group exploration, where students are researching different kinds of environmental groups and sharing on those, like the Natural Resources Foundation or Greenpeace. And then the biggest project, the biggest learning assessment that accounts for 60% of the score in the class is their environmental issue investigation and action project, where it's broken into different parts, where first they have a summary of the issue, they develop an action plan, and then students take action and they report on that action plan through written paper, but then also presentations to their classmates. In the future, I'm going to be removing the environmental group exploration and having students instead having it be an assignment where they host an environmental issue forum in groups of 3 to 5 students out in the community. But to share a little bit about how I'm currently using the environmental issue forum, I've been using it in our course over the past 2 years. The course has been a spring-only course, and now I'll be offering it this coming fall. So I've been busy preparing, and I'm looking forward to it. One reason why I see environmental issues as a great fit for this particular course is that the course is a required course for students, or a required course for environmental education students, sorry. And typically in our environmental ed classes, we talk a lot about how they might work with children, because that is a great audience. So it's a large audience. And so this provides us with an opportunity to engage adults as well, and a format for them to do that. Also, the students participate in the forum itself initially as participants. And so by talking through what are the trade-offs, and we use the climate choices issue framework, talking through what are the trade-offs, what are potential actions that they could take, it also provides the students with an idea of what they might do for their environmental issue investigation and action project that I just was talking about. In this past spring, we partnered with Eastern Kentucky University So I'm glad to be presenting with Melinda and Billy today. And we first began really serious discussion in the fall of 2015, though Melinda and I had bounced this idea a few years ago too. We met in January of 16, and then we matched, during that meeting, the three of us matched our relevant activities and issues assignment around the Environmental Issues Forum. So we made sure that at similar times we did various pieces, components of integrating the EIF, and I'll show you that in the next slide. Another piece of it is that we developed and implemented a shared climate literacy assessment, which included questions at the tail end of that for students to make comments about the Environmental Issues Forum itself. And so the climate literacy assessment was administered at the start of the semester and then again at the end of the semester, and all of our students took the same survey through the use of Qualtrics. And we'll actually be presenting on that, on our findings fully at the NAAEE conference in October. So hopefully we'll see you there. To share about how we decided to integrate Environmental Issues Forum, and this was based on, some of it is how I had implemented it the first year without partnering with Eastern Kentucky, and some of it was work that Eastern Kentucky had been doing. And so how we integrate the Environmental Issues Forum into the course is that we, at the start of the semester, but after students have first taken that climate literacy survey, we talked about the science of climate change and did some different kinds of activities related to climate change and used that to talk about environmental issues and introducing environmental issues. Then early on in the semester, we hosted an Environmental Issues Forum with just the class. And so that was when I served as the moderator for the students that were in my class. We held the forum just as you would with a public audience. So students read through the materials, we deliberated what the options were, talking about the trade-offs, and taking notes and then breaking into groups and discussing our possible options of what steps could be next. And that's where students could lead then into considering those possible, the ideas that they brainstorm at that forum as possibilities for what kind of action they want to take as part of their environmental action assignment. Then after that, later in the semester, we did a moderator training for the students so that they could learn about how to host an Environmental Issues Forum. So talking about how you arrange the room, how you respond to different values, much of what Bora just shared about making sure that you're pulling in different people's opinions and ideas and showing different people's values. And then we started planning for our Environmental Issues Forum with community members. And as we planned that forum, it was a forum that took place on campus. And that's how we did it the first year as well. So for both years, we've hosted forums on campus. With this new assignment, I'm planning on having students actually host forums out in the community. I was running into some challenges logistically of how I might do that before, but I think I got it worked out. So students planned the EIF for community members. We broke down who was going to take what role. And so we had roles like some students were the moderators. And so they were going to moderate, one student was going to moderate for option 1, another student for option 2, and so on. Also, same with note takers, trying to find a role for each person. Some students were responsible for marketing the event. So also as we planned for the EIF, we talked about who did we want to invite? How did we want to invite them? How could we get people to attend? Much later in the semester, students hosted the Environmental Issues Forum then for community members and had that experience of it was great to see one of the moderators this last semester, some students in the same class, which it's interesting to host a forum with them because they all come from a natural resources background, so they have a lot of similar ideas, but there are some conflicting ideas. But the moderator this last spring had to deal with some contentious issues with her own classmates, and so it's interesting to see her work through that. And then we reflect on the EIF experience, so we were able to talk about how that moderator handled that more challenging experience. So it's been really interesting to have the Environmental Issues Forum as a part of this particular course, because it allows us, just thinking about the enduring understandings of the course, where these are complex and dynamic issues. It's a responsibility of all of ours. So to talk through those different options and talk through what those trade-offs are, that's, I think, really powerful for students in itself. But then to take it to the next level and for them to host a forum on their own. And like I said, a lot of these are students that are majoring in environmental education and might want to use this forum in their future. For them to host a forum that deals with a challenging issue like climate change and to see the process of deliberation, I think is also really powerful. So I'm looking forward to the fall semester and trying out a different route and mixing things up a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pass it over to Eastern Kentucky University, my colleagues Melinda and Billy there, so that they can introduce themselves and share about what they're doing and how they've implemented it in their classroom.
Oh, we're waiting for Melinda and Billy. They're on the phone, so hopefully they are unmuting their phone.
I see, while we wait for them, I see that Amanda has chimed in, and Amanda's was just one project that came out. To give a few more examples, is that okay if I do that?
Sure, while we're waiting. Oh, wait a second.
We're on the phone now.
Okay. I'll be quiet then and let you guys take over.
Okay. This is, I'm Melinda Wilder, and Billy and I are here from Eastern Kentucky University, and we're excited to be here with Bora and Becca to talk about the things that we have done with the forums. I'm the director of the Division of Natural Areas at Eastern Kentucky University, and I teach in the College of Education.
And my name is Billy, as Melinda said, and I was, until recently, the director of the Center for Environmental Education here at Eastern Kentucky University, and I still teach as an adjunct for the Department of Curriculum and Instruction in our environmental education courses.
So, and Billy and I kind of team teach the courses you'll be hearing about as we move forward. So we have used the forums in two different classes. One is a biology environmental issues course, and one is a methods course, teaching environmental education. Both of these courses were developed and as part of a program we have that's called an environmental education endorsement here at Eastern Kentucky University. And that was originally developed for pre-service and in-service teachers. The bio class is a little bit different than the University of Wisconsin because it's a hybrid class. So it's 50% online and 50% in person. And again, the focus of the course is very similar to Becca's in that the students learn to identify and investigate and evaluate environmental issues and then plan appropriate action. The teaching in environmental education is a methods course. So again, it's looking at how do you teach environmental education. The course population, so the biggest difference between our two courses and the ones at the University of Wisconsin is that these are both electives. Nobody's required to take any of these courses. Again, if you're in the environmental education endorsement, these are two of the courses you can choose to take. Recently, though, we have found that we have a variety of students that take it for an elective. So we've had graduate and undergraduate students not only in the environmental education endorsement, but from biology and the Recreation and Parks Administration, as well as a public health major. And then the Teaching Environmental Education course, again, we've had Recreation and Parks Administration folks that are interested in environmental education in that course as well. So again, we have a bit of a different population. The other big difference is because these are elective courses, we don't have as many students in either of the courses. The topics, so we're going to kind of focus on the bio class because that's the one that we collaborated with the University of Wisconsin, the environmental issues class. And so our course topics are very similar to those that you saw in the University of Wisconsin's course, but we spend most of our time looking at environmental issues and the science related to those issues. And that has to do with the fact that it's a hybrid course. So very typically, in the beginning of the semester, I let the students choose the environmental issues they're most interested in. There's some required ones like climate change and energy. And then as we go throughout the semester, we look at first the science and social and the systems interaction in that issue, and then we look at the key players and their values and their points of view. We don't get to take any fun field trips to the state capitol or anything like that. The learning assessments are very similar as well in that course, again, except for the fact that because it's a hybrid course, so they have discussion board participation that they're required to do. And then again, since we have graduate students, we have to have some differentiation for them. The majority of the graduate students are in-service teachers, and so their final project is developing a teaching plan for involving their students, whether elementary, middle, or high school, in learning about some local environmental issue. Just like Becca, we have used the Environmental Issues Forum in the Environmental Issues class for the past 2 years. In year one, I used it as a contrast to a traditional debate. So previously, the course always included a traditional debate, and so back in 2015, we did a traditional debate on an energy topic, and then we did the National Issues Forum on America's Energy Future, and then we compared and contrast the results from that, and we'll show you some data on that in a minute. Also, I allowed them that year as their final project to draft an environmental issues forum on a local topic. So the idea behind that was for them to start thinking about environmental issues in different ways, and again, in the similar format where there's 3 choices, and they had to look at the drawbacks and the benefits from all of those choices and present that. And again, as Becca told you, this past year we partnered with the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, and we matched the relevant learning activities in class on climate change, and then we did the same sort of integration of the issues forum. So again, Billy and I conducted that issues forum in class early on. We trained them as moderators, and then they had to go out and do a campus community issues forum as well. And I'd like to, at this point, thank Kentucky State University because they helped us fund the community issues forum by paying for the issue guide. And we found that the way to attract college students to participate in a community issues forum is to give them extra credit and to buy them pizza. So that's Kentucky State University helped us do that. In the teaching and environmental education class, we taught that this summer as in a workshop format. It's an all-day, everyday class, and what we did this summer was piloted the environmental issues revision of the America's Energy Future Forum. And we presented that again, not for content reasons, but as a teaching strategy. And again, we contrasted that with an alternative to a traditional debate. Many environmental education curricula include the idea of a debate as a teaching strategy. So we wanted to look at that look at the issues forum as an alternative to that.
All right, so we're going to look at some very preliminary findings that we observed. First of all, I'll just reiterate that our findings are probably skewed because of a couple of reasons. Number one is a very small population in the class, and then both are elective courses which attract people of a usually like-minded thinking. So this is the one. This is the one in 2015 where we used the National Issues Forum, America's Energy Future, the original National Issues Forum. And I'll just let you look at this, and I'll point out a couple of things about this chart that I think are interesting to note. You know, questions 1, 4, and 5. It's very obvious that the Issues Forum was the clear winner as far as folks thinking about those statements that are written there. And it's interesting in question 2 and 3 that a majority of the students favor the traditional debate for both understanding someone else's perspective and then learning factual information. So that's pretty interesting. We haven't been able to do any follow-up with that, but it does bring out a couple interesting points. So the next slide that we're looking here, this is based on doing the forum with environmental issues class. Again, we have a very small population there, so you can see the number of students that took part in this were 12. And then these are the follow-up questions where we're looking at this. So how has your thinking about the issue changed? If you look there, you can see that opinions haven't changed because because of the very homogeneous makeup of the class. They felt that they were already aware of the issue and understand the actions that need to be taken. So these findings are based on a content analysis. So we asked these folks. This is part of their reflection, individual reflections that they did after the forum, and so we looked through for some categories that stood out as far as all of the students' responses. And so, you know, the first one, we had quite a few students who said their opinion hadn't changed because of the fact that they're already aware. We felt that they were a little surprised. Several of them indicated that they were surprised that they thought the public was not as aware as they were, and so that there were actions being initiated. They learned that through the forum. And then they expressed hope and felt optimistic that people were willing to make changes, and then expressed the need to be more aggressive in the actions. And they felt that they could do more on a personal level. So I thought all of those were pretty interesting to look at. And then, again, this is the second follow-up question: how has your thinking about the people's views changed? And these categories were the ones that stood out there. They helped them look at others' points of view. A lot of them expressed the fact that they had not thought about the socioeconomic, the impact on the people's personal choices, and how different socioeconomic levels affected their ability to make choices in some points. Again, they all said that there were similar points of view due to the nature of the class, and then more common ground. They felt like through using the forum, they were able to look at and see later how much more common ground they had than they originally thought. So these are just a couple of quotes. I don't want to read these to you, but I'll just let you look through these quotes. So the significant points that we brought out, that we think were brought out by these points, was a general shift from a negative outlook about the different choices to a more positive. So there was a lot of that, and then also a shift from personal lifestyle to helping others express about educating others as to why they needed to conserve as well. And lastly, a shift in recognizing the impact of the socioeconomic factors. And all of those were things that we covered as far as the categories that stood out. And these are just some quotes that we feel like were pulled out from that content analysis that helped us come up with those categories. So we find that quite interesting.
And so just to take a look at it, I thought it was really interesting. So we have a lot of analysis to do yet with our data as far as looking at pre-post comparisons of climate literacy content knowledge and attitudes and behaviors as well. But just taking a look at how students felt about the session itself, the Environmental Issues Forum itself. So this is a question from that same survey. How much did attending the sessions change your understanding about climate change? And so I just wanted to share, as Melinda and Billy were, that again, it seems to have a positive effect on the students. So these are quotes from the students. Helps in understanding the perspectives of other people, just, considering why others think the way that they do. And then where they say about attending each session, so they mean the session in the classroom, but then also the session it's assumed that they mean then the session for the community members. So, so a better understanding of what climate change actually is. No longer a blur, and I can finally see clearly now the issue at hand. Before these sessions, I knew climate change was occurring, but I didn't understand what it really was doing to the world. So it opened my eyes to the issue, what we have to do to fight the issue, and how we can spread the word to others to do the same. So we hope that through the Environmental Issues Forum, that it's affecting the students' own understanding of climate change and climate issues, but that it's also helping them see this as a teaching strategy, as a tool for that. Melinda or Billy, did you have any other comments back about about our findings? Then let's move on to Bora talking about what's next.
Okay, so
the only thing that, sorry, we have trouble with our mute and unmute here. No, the only other thing I wanted to add is, again, at the NAAEE presentation, we hope to have some more data that as a follow-up to this.
Excellent, thank you, and thanks to Becca and Melinda and to Billy for this. So just so you know a little bit about what is coming up for environmental issues forums, or what we sort of already have in the pipeline. We have the climate change issue guide, and Becca, you may want to mute your thing because I'm getting some feedback.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. There we go. As Melinda mentioned and Billy mentioned, there is a energy guide that is in development right now. We've taken the one that Kettering Foundation developed and sort of updated it and switched it around a little bit to be a bit more environmental. And that one we hope will be finalized sometime later this fall. And we're also working with 5 states, actually 6 states, to develop issue guides specifically around water issues for their state. So for Florida, Kentucky, Kansas, Wisconsin, Colorado, and California. And those issue guides hopefully will be finalized or at least shareable later this fall. We've also developed a middle school teacher guide and a high school teacher guide for the climate choices issue discussion. And we will be having moderator training at the NAAEE conference, a one-day workshop that people could attend to learn to become moderators. And just for you to know that there is also an online version of being able to do these forums as well as the face-to-face version. And information on all of those different pieces is available at NAAEE.org/EIF. Also, just wanted to mention, if you do work with teachers, we are part of the White House Climate Action Plan, and we are hoping to help 100 teachers or classrooms use EIF on climate change sometime this year. For more information, you can go to the NAAEE website, and from there you can get to National Issues Forum Institute and the Kettering Foundation and lots of information about this process. Melinda, Billy, and Becca are doing a session at the NAAEE conference on Saturday, October 22nd, to talk more about what they've been doing and their findings. So hopefully you will join us for that. I'm going to open this up for questions, so type in your questions. And as you are busily thinking about your questions and typing them in, I would just want to run through just sort of advertisement that there are monthly webinars available through NAAEE, and you can go up to the website to ePro and take a look and see what's coming up. There are also these special interest groups, one focusing on climate change, as well as one focusing on higher education that you can participate in. And we would hope you would join those. All you have to do is log into the NAAEE website. It's free. You can join those discussions for free just by filling out a form. And please do join us at the NAAEE conference in October. These are a couple of the upcoming webinars. One, Kristen does a whole lot of communications and messaging strategies. Sarah will be helping us think about advocacy work for environmental ed. There are lots of other webinars coming up. So as you have a chance to participate in any of those, we certainly welcome that. But I'm going to leave you with this slide so that you have people's email addresses, and you can hopefully be able to communicate with us individually if you'd like, or go up to that EE Pro Higher Education group and post questions, keep the discussion going. So it looks like, let's see, so Amanda, I'm going to call into other people to help answer these questions. Is there any data on other community members, households, or businesses, owners within the community? What techniques are available to bring in those perspectives? So one of the things I'll just sort of mention is that the environmental issues forums, as well as the national issue forums, are used at the community level too. So they're used within the classroom, often within the classroom, as a teaching tool and a way of helping people understand a particular issue. But most often these are actually designed for community use. So they really are for people who are just your regular everyday member of the community to come to a forum and be able to deliberate with others, and hopefully be able to then find kindred souls who would like to work on a particular issue within their community. Issue forums are also used often when a community wants to delve into and deal with a particular issue. So they actually frame one of these issue guides relatively quickly in their community to address a specific issue. So it might be an environmental issue around something like water or drought or climate change or energy use or air pollution or lead in the water, or it could be about some other issue, a social justice issue, teen pregnancy, any number of other things, and have a chance for people to be able to discuss and move forward, hopefully, in that discussion. So hopefully that answers your question, Amanda. There has been research done on these various forums, and it's mostly available through the Kettering Foundation. Becca, you had something to add?
Well, I was just going to chime in, like an example. I participated in Wisconsin is working on a water environmental issues forum, as Bora had mentioned, and I participated in kind of their pilot run of that, and it was fascinating because they invited all different people to the table, and so there were people representing that were like environmental action groups, and then there were large scale farmers and there were small scale farmers, and because in Wisconsin that's mostly what our water issues are related to, is the amount that is used for our fields. And it was really great. It was just a pilot, and at the end, the group that had come together to do the forum actually wanted to continue the conversation because they had come to more common ground than they had in the past. And they had all worked with each other, talked to each other about the issue in the past. And so I think that group is actually going to continue on with the conversation that was started through just this pilot, testing of this one forum. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, thank you, Becca. And that was pretty much my understanding too, is that there was a hope that that group that had been really quite contentious, from my understanding, in the past, had sort of found at least some way of bridging the discussion. Hillary has made an interesting comment here in the chat box, and I just want to call out to Hillary because she's part of the Colorado team that's developing a water issue guide for Colorado. But she's mentioning that the students could moderate forums and collect some of that data themselves, and then be able to sort of pull together what people during their forums talked about with the issue and what were some of the things that they came to conclusion on, and maybe draft some sort of policy brief based on that. So there are obviously lots of different interesting ways that we can make this real so that it's not just a class exercise. Class exercises are good. There's lots of learning that can take place, but also it provides a way that they can hone some of their research skills and start to think about how we can then share that information back to the original forum group, but also share that information potentially to policymakers, decision makers, other actors with the particular issue. So I think I am going to, Melinda and Billy, you might have something to say, and then we probably need to sign off here.
Yeah, we also want to mention the fact that at the end of every forum, there's a questionnaire that you give to the participants. So when our students did their community forum, we gave a questionnaire that was designed by EIF, and then that data then gets sent to the National Issues Forum and EIF Forum. So there is data from those that then is collected, and I assume, Bora, that then that's available for people to look at that data and then use.
Yes, and so our NIF, basically, the National Issues Forum Institute, they collect that data and they will look at it across all of the various issues. But they're going to be forwarding that data to us, and then we will be taking a deeper dive into it to look at how people are thinking about climate change, how they're thinking about the forum process. And so what can we learn about that as an environmental education tool? And I noticed that Christine Lee is on this webinar too, and I call out to her because she has been part of our environmental issues forums from the beginning and helping us look at data gathering and evaluation of the process so that it's really a learning process for us and in cooperation with Kettering. So very, very good point. Thank you, Melinda. So I think since we have gone past the hour and we don't want to hold people up too long here, do want to thank you all for your participation. Please do visit the Environmental Issues Forums site on the NAAEE website, as well as EE Pro. And if you're not part of EE Pro, join it. It's a great, great, wonderful way of engaging with your colleagues and learning about all sorts of things that are going on in the field. There is a higher education forum, and Becca is actually one of the moderators for that. There are also forums on climate change and green schools and diversity, inclusion, and equity, and all sorts of different issues. So I'm sure there'd be something that you would be interested in. And I do invite you to continue this discussion through the Higher Education Forum. So thank you all very much, and goodbye. And thank you to my wonderful co-presenters, to Becca and Melinda and Billy.